There are rooms filled with voices, and then there are the ones who choose not to add to the noise. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that silence too is a language. A language that most people have forgotten how to read. In every gathering, in every circle of conversation, there exists a particular kind of presence. Not loud, not attention-seeking, but undeniably there. These are the people who watch more than they speak, who listen more than they interrupt, who observe the world from a distance that others mistake for disconnection. But silence is not absence. It is not emptiness. It is a choice, a refuge, and sometimes a prison all at once. Society has taught us that participation means speaking, that to be present means to be heard. That value is measured in words, in contributions, in the ability to fill space with sound. But there are those who have learned a different truth, that sometimes the deepest understanding comes not from speaking, but from the space between words. From watching how people move when they think no one is paying attention. From noticing what is left unsaid. The silent ones are often misunderstood. They are called shy, awkward, disinterested, aloof. People create stories about them, filling their silence with assumptions because humans are uncomfortable with what they cannot immediately define. If someone does not speak, they must be afraid. If they do not laugh loudly, they must be unhappy. If they do not seek attention, they must lack confidence. But these are the projections of a world that has forgotten that not everyone needs to be seen to feel whole. Silence in groups is not always born from fear. Sometimes it is born from awareness. An awareness that words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. That every sentence carries weight, and not all thoughts deserve to be shared. There is a kind of wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to hold back. A wisdom that comes from having spoken too soon in the past, from having been misunderstood, from having watched words create distance where closeness once existed. There is also protection in silence, a shield against judgment, against vulnerability, against the exhausting performance of being someone you are not. In groups, people wear masks. They adjust their laughter, their opinions, their entire demeanor to fit the expectations of those around them. But the silent ones have often decided that this performance is too costly, that it is better to say nothing than to say something that is not true. That authenticity, even if it means being unseen, is more valuable than approval. But this does not mean silence is easy. It is not. To sit in a room full of people and feel the weight of your own quietness is a particular kind of loneliness. To watch conversations flow around you like a river you are not part of. To have thoughts that remain trapped inside because the moment to share them passes too quickly, or because the fear of how they will be received is too strong. Silence can feel like safety and suffocation at the same time. There are different kinds of silence. Some people are quiet because they are observing. They are the ones who notice everything. The shift in tone when someone is uncomfortable, the way laughter can be genuine or forced, the subtle power dynamics that play out in every social interaction. They are the readers of rooms, the interpreters of energy, the ones who understand what is happening beneath the surface. Their silence is not passive. It is active, engaged, deeply thoughtful. They are not absent from the conversation. They are absorbing it in a way that speaking would interrupt. Then there are those who are silent because they do not know how to enter. The rhythm of group conversation is fast, overlapping, unpredictable. It requires a kind of social agility that not everyone possesses. There are those who prepare what they want to say, only to find that by the time they are ready, the topic has moved on. Who wait for a pause that never comes. Who feel that their contribution, when it finally arrives, will seem out of place or too late. For them, silence is not a choice but a barrier they cannot cross. And then there are those whose silence is protection, who have learned through experience that speaking up can be dangerous, that their words will be dismissed, misunderstood, or used against them. That vulnerability in groups is not always met with kindness. These are the people who have been interrupted too many times, talked over too many times, made to feel that what they have to say does not matter. And so they stop trying, not because they have nothing to offer, but because they have learned that offering it comes with too much pain. Psychology tells us that silence in social situations is often linked to temperament, that some people are simply more introverted, more comfortable in their inner world than in the chaos of social interaction, that their brains process information differently, needing time and space to think before they speak. This is true, but it is not the whole truth. Because silence is also learned. It is shaped by experience, by trauma, by the messages we receive about who is allowed to take up space and who is not. Children who are told to be quiet learn that their voice is not welcome. Adults who are consistently ignored learn that their words have no value. People who are punished for speaking their truth learn that silence is safer. And so silence becomes not just a personality trait, but a survival strategy. A way to navigate a world that does not always make room for everyone, but there is something that happens to those who stay silent in groups. A kind of internal dialogue that never stops. While others are speaking, the silent ones are thinking. They are forming opinions, making connections, questioning, analyzing. Their minds are not quiet just because their mouths are. In fact, their inner world is often louder, richer, more complex than anything they could express in the brief, fragmented nature of group conversation. They live in their thoughts in a way that others do not. And this can be both a gift and a burden. It is a gift because it allows for depth, for reflection, for the kind of understanding that comes from stepping back rather than diving in. The silent ones often see patterns that others miss. They understand motivations, recognize inconsistencies, sense what is unspoken. They are the ones who remember conversations long after everyone else has forgotten them. Who think about what was said, what was meant, what was hidden. Their silence gives them perspective, but it is also a burden because it can lead to isolation. To the feeling of being separate, of watching life happen rather than participating in it. To the fear that they are missing out, that they are being left behind, that their quietness is making them invisible. There is a particular sadness in feeling like you are on the outside of something, even when you are physically present. In wondering if anyone would notice if you left. In questioning whether your presence matters at all. And yet, there is also a kind of peace that comes with accepting one's own silence. A recognition that not everyone is meant to be the loudest voice in the room. That there is value in being the listener, the observer, the one who holds space rather than fills it. That the world needs people who think before they speak, who choose their words carefully, who understand that silence can be just as powerful as sound. Some people stay silent in groups because they are comfortable with who they are. They do not need external validation. They do not need to prove themselves through words. They are content to exist in their own way, at their own pace, without conforming to the expectation that everyone must perform their personality for others to witness. This is not weakness. It is strength. It is the strength of knowing that your worth is not determined by how much space you take up. But for others, silence is something they wish they could break. A barrier they did not choose, a habit they cannot seem to escape. They want to speak but do not know how. They want to be part of the conversation, but feel like they are always one step behind. They watch others connect effortlessly and wonder why it is so hard for them. Why words that feel so clear in their mind become tangled when they try to speak them. Why the fear of judgment is so much stronger than the desire to be heard. There is no single reason why people stay silent in groups. It is never just one thing. It is temperament and experience, fear and wisdom, protection and paralysis. It is the accumulation of every time they spoke and regretted it, every time they stayed quiet and regretted that too. It is the weight of expectations, both their own and others, and the exhaustion of trying to be something they are not. And perhaps what is most important to understand is that silence is not a problem that needs to be fixed. It is not a flaw, not a deficiency, not something to be cured. It is simply a different way of being in the world. A way that has its own challenges, yes, but also its own beauty, its own depth, its own meaning. Because the truth is, the world is too loud. There is too much talking, too much noise, too much filling of space with words that do not need to be spoken. And in that noise, something is lost. The ability to truly listen, the capacity to sit with discomfort without rushing to fill it. The understanding that some things are better left unsaid, that some moments are meant to be felt rather than explained. The people who stay silent in groups are not absent. They are present in a way that is often invisible to those who only know how to measure presence by volume. They are the ones who notice, who remember, who understand that connection is not always loud, that intimacy does not always require words. That sometimes the most meaningful exchanges happen in the spaces between speaking. There is a loneliness in silence, yes, but there is also a kind of freedom. The freedom to exist without performance, to be without explanation, to simply be present. in whatever form that takes, without needing to justify it to anyone. What the world needs to learn is that silence in groups is not a problem to be solved. It is not something that requires intervention, fixing, or endless encouragement to just speak up. Sometimes the kindest thing is to make space for silence, to not fill every pause with chatter, to not demand that everyone contribute equally in the same way, to recognize that presence has many forms, and that participation does not always sound the same. There is a violence in forced speech, in making someone share before they are ready, in insisting that quiet people explain themselves, justify their silence, perform a version of engagement that does not come naturally to them. This pressure does not create connection. It creates performance. It creates anxiety. It reinforces the belief that who they naturally are is not enough, that they must change to be acceptable. And so perhaps the invitation is not for the silent ones to speak more, but for everyone else to listen differently, to notice who is not speaking and wonder not what is wrong with them, but what they might be observing, to create environments where different communication styles are welcomed, where silence is not immediately interpreted as a problem, where people are trusted to engage in the way that feels authentic to them. For those who stay silent in groups, there is no single path forward. Some will learn to speak more, will practice and push, and gradually expand their comfort zone. Some will find smaller groups, different settings, contexts where their voice feels safer. Some will embrace their silence, will stop fighting against it, will recognize it as part of who they are, rather than something to overcome. All of these paths are valid. All of these choices are their own. What matters is that the silence is understood. Not as absence, not as failure, not as something less than, but as a different way of being present, as a form of engagement that is internal rather than external, as a choice, a protection, a preference, or a struggle, but always as something that deserves respect rather than correction. Because in the end, the people who stay silent in groups are not missing from the world. They are part of it in their own way. They are listening when others speak. They are thinking when others react. They are present in the quiet spaces between words. And their silence, like all silence, holds meaning. It just requires a different kind of attention to hear it. What society often fails to recognize is that silence holds memory. It carries the weight of every moment someone wanted to speak but couldn't. Every thought that seemed too vulnerable to share. Every opinion that felt too different, too raw, too honest for the safety of casual conversation. The silent ones do not forget these moments. They collect them, store them, carry them like stones in their pockets. And, over time, these accumulated moments of holding back shape how they move through the world. There is a peculiar kind of exhaustion that comes with constant self-monitoring, with calculating every potential response before speaking, with weighing whether a comment will be received well, whether it will land correctly, whether it is worth the risk of misunderstanding. For some, this process happens so quickly it becomes automatic, a background hum of anxiety that never quite turns off. For others, it is more deliberate, more conscious, a careful negotiation with themselves about whether this moment, this topic, this group is safe enough to venture into. And safety is the word that matters most. Because beneath the silence of many who stay quiet in groups is a fundamental question of safety. Not physical safety, but emotional safety. Psychological safety, the safety to be wrong, to be awkward, to be misunderstood without being rejected. The safety to take up space without feeling like an intruder. The safety to exist as oneself without having to perform a version that is more palatable, more acceptable, more like everyone else. In groups, there are unspoken rules, hierarchies of who gets to speak, who gets listened to, whose ideas are taken seriously, and whose are dismissed. These hierarchies are rarely explicit, but they are always present. They are established through tone, through body language, through patterns of interruption and validation. And those who stay silent have often learned, consciously or unconsciously, where they fall in these hierarchies. They have learned that their voice does not carry the same weight, that their words are not met with the same attention, that it is easier to observe than to compete for space in a conversation that does not seem to have room for them. But here is what is rarely acknowledged. Silence is also a form of power. Not the loud, obvious power of commanding attention, but a quieter, subtler power. The power of withholding. The power of keeping one's thoughts private, one's reactions controlled, one's true self protected. In a world that constantly demands transparency, that insists everyone share their thoughts and feelings and experiences, there is something radical about choosing not to, about maintaining mystery, about refusing to perform. The silent ones see more than they are given credit for. They watch how people change depending on who is in the room, how opinions shift with social pressure, how vulnerability is sometimes rewarded and sometimes weaponized. They notice who interrupts who makes eye contact, who is included and who is subtly excluded. They understand group dynamics in a way that those caught up in the flow of conversation often miss. Their vantage point from the edges gives them clarity that the center cannot provide. This does not mean they are judging, though they are sometimes accused of it. There is a common assumption that quiet people are silently criticizing, that their silence is disapproval. But more often, their silence is simply observation, a genuine curiosity about human behavior, a fascination with the complexities of interaction. They are not standing apart because they think they are better. They are standing apart because that is where they can see most clearly. Yet there is also truth in the fact that prolonged silence can create distance, that choosing not to share creates a barrier, however thin, between oneself and others. Intimacy requires vulnerability. Connection requires revealing something of who we are. And those who consistently stay silent, who consistently hold back, may find themselves wondering why relationships feel surface level, why friendships do not deepen, why they feel alone even when surrounded by people. The protection that silence offers comes with a price. It keeps pain out, but it also keeps closeness at bay. There are moments when the silent ones wish they could be different. When they watch someone else speak effortlessly, laugh unself-consciously, command attention without fear, and feel a pang of something that might be envy or might be grief. Grief for the version of themselves they imagine could exist if they were braver, more confident, less burdened by overthinking. They wonder what it would feel like to speak without calculating, to share a thought the moment it arrives instead of analyzing it to death, to be spontaneous instead of careful. But spontaneity feels dangerous when you have learned that words matter. When you have seen how a single misplaced comment can shift the entire energy of a room. When you have experienced the sting of being misunderstood, the shame of saying something that landed wrong, the isolation of realizing that what you thought would create connection instead created distance. These memories do not fade easily. They become part of the calculus that happens before every potential utterance. They are the reason silence sometimes feels safer than speech. And then there are the people who have been silent for so long that they have forgotten how to speak in groups, who have let so much time pass that the idea of suddenly contributing feels impossible. The longer the silence continues, the heavier it becomes. The harder it is to break. There is a fear that if they speak now, after being quiet for so long, everyone will turn and look, surprised, curious, possibly judgment, that the attention will be overwhelming, that they will stumble over their words precisely because they are so conscious of being heard after so much quiet. This is the paradox of silence in groups. The longer it persists, the more it reinforces itself, the more difficult it becomes to change. It is not that people who are silent want to remain so forever. Many of them long to connect, to be heard, to feel like they belong. But the gap between longing and action grows wider with time. The internal barrier becomes higher. The risk feels greater. What those who stay silent often do not realize is that their silence speaks. It communicates something, even if it is not what they intend. To some, it communicates disinterest. To others, it communicates superiority, as if the silent person is above the conversation. To others still, it communicates vulnerability, a kind of fragility that makes them want to include, to draw out, to make space. The meaning others assign to silence is unpredictable. It is filtered through their own experiences, their own insecurities, their own understanding of what silence means. And perhaps this is the cruelest part, that even in trying to protect themselves, even in choosing the perceived safety of not speaking, the silent ones are still being interpreted, still being judged, still being misunderstood. There is no true invisibility in silence. There is only a different kind of visibility, one that is harder to control, harder to manage, harder to defend against, because it is not based on what was said, but on what was not. But there is also something that happens in silence that is worth honoring. A kind of internal richness that develops, a depth of thought that comes from spending more time in one's own mind. The silent ones often become skilled at introspection, at understanding their own emotions, at navigating their inner landscape with precision. They know themselves in ways that those who are constantly projecting outward may not. They have had to befriend themselves because so much of their time is spent in their own company, even when surrounded by others. This self-knowledge can be a source of strength. It can lead to clarity about values, about boundaries, about what truly matters. It can create resilience because the validation does not come from external sources, but from within. The silent ones learn, sometimes painfully, that they cannot rely on others to affirm their worth, that they must find it themselves. And once found, it becomes something that cannot easily be taken away. There is also creativity in silence, space for imagination, for ideas to develop without the pressure of immediate articulation. Many artists, writers, thinkers, creators are people who spend much of their lives on the periphery of social interaction, watching, absorbing, processing. Their silence in groups becomes material for their work. Their observation becomes insight. Their distance becomes perspective. What felt like a limitation becomes a gift. But this does not erase the loneliness, the wish to be understood. The desire, however buried, to be included without having to change. To be accepted not despite the silence but with it. To find people who do not require constant verbal affirmation of presence. Who understand that someone can be fully engaged without being vocal. Who value listening as much as speaking. Who create space for different ways of being. These people exist, though they can be hard to find. They are often the other quiet ones, the other observers, the ones who understand that silence is not rejection, that quiet is not disinterest, that stillness is not absence. When two silent people find each other, there can be a recognition, a relief, a sense of being seen in a way that does not require explanation. The connection that forms in these spaces is different. It is not built on words, but on understanding, on shared experience, on the unspoken acknowledgement that not everyone moves through the world in the same way, and that is not only acceptable, but valuable.